what is it? I have to get your answers directly. That the Chinese business people are looking at when they are throwing huge sums of money into the European club footballs. Is it the money, the profits they're looking at, the prestige, or getting a training ground for the Chinese players, or just being patriotic? I mean, what exactly is it, Professor Liu? Probably you have a better understanding.
You covered most of the answers.
All right, what are the rest?
Well, I think number one, yes, to answer the Chinese political call, because the Chairman Xi Jinping, and for a number of times, they proposed that the three-stage China soccer dream. For the first stage, we need to qualify for the World Cup, and for the second stage, we need to host the World Cup, and in the end, we win out the World Cup.
I can tell you're a soccer fan. You can remember those stages very well. But what exactly do you think the business people are looking at? Is it real business that we're talking about?
Well, I think number one, they have the ego. And it's like 10 years ago, simply to be a member in the golf club, you feel prestigious. But right now, you own a club. You own the crown of the sports. So that's something they are looking for. So number two is the try to synergize the sports business together with the business, because many of those companies, they are pushing forward for their market expansion in the countries that they own a club. So like the one company like the Lotus, they are really investing into the stadium by selling the lighting equipment in those stadiums.
Okay.
And so the Alibaba e-commerce is spreading all over, and because they also see the big market in those sports fans. So by leveraging both the global team and also the Chinese sports fans, they can really build a loyalty and dynamism.
Well,
among
Mr.
their
Rowan, let me ask you.
customers.
It's not fair that I let you to be silent over there. Will the wish, as being mentioned by Professor Liu, from these Chinese business people when they try to make an investment, huge investment into the football clubs inside Europe, be able to win them the rewards as they wish?
Well, I think the main rewards. I think ego is definitely part of it, like the major investors from other parts of the world into European football. But in China at the moment, we have a conflagration of not just of a business opportunity in a time when billionaires are looking for that ego trip, but also a very strong political support for the sport of football. And these two coming together is what has unleashed this, sort of craze of football investment.
But there has been a lot of jokes about investments when you do it about the sports industry. And the jokes coming from Europe, as some term it, is the safest way to lose money in a gradual and sometimes in a sudden way is to invest in a football club. Of course, that is only a joke, as they say, but it also indicates the kind of danger of investment involved in this specific industry.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, traditionally it's been very hard to make money out of football clubs, but we're seeing an investment now which is going much wider than just the clubs.
What do you mean by that?
Well, we're seeing Chinese acquisitions of some of the rights holders of the football leagues, and they're looking at the management companies that look after the players in the game. And so it's a much wider play, but I think with the same ultimate aims, which is to get themselves into the system and the environment and the elite, rather sort of rarefied atmosphere of global football. And all these ways are now being taken, none of which are actually helping Chinese football directly.
Yeah, I think the point you raised is pretty much echoed by Mr. Wang Jianling, who is also an aggressive acquirer of those football teams. He said if you really want to make money out of investing into soccer teams, either your brain goes wrong or you're a crook. So I think he's pretty much there with the business sense. But he also said if you're able to integrate this into a larger business portfolio, so that through the drawing attention, through building the loyalty among the customers, that you're able to to really get a return on the investment, from other businesses. So I think that's the way, people move forward with this sort of investment.
Before we go to about what exactly, whether it could help the Chinese soccer industry, let me ask you, can you really buy into a mechanism, buy your way into the system, and become a important player just overnight because of the investment?
Yes, you can, and you can do that at the very highest levels of the global game, and this is exactly what we're seeing.
It's a shortcut.
It's a shortcut. It's an easy cash solution, if you have the cash, to buy into exactly that elite pyramid of top professional football.
Cash is not something that China is short of at this moment, at least. However, what about the skills? What about the plans to update the Chinese soccer? What about the best players, how to cultivate them? What about how to send the Chinese players overseas to get the best training and let them to see what is the world level of soccer? Those are the questions. Investment is expected to help upgrade the Chinese football industry. Sports agencies are also seen as critical to vitalizing a commercialized football economy. It's also believed to yield the easiest profits. Just take a look at the agent fees paid by UK clubs. Look over there. Wow, quite a huge number over there. But such mechanisms are still new to Chinese football. So the question is, can China, with these huge sums of investment, and some of the pioneers from the business community getting into the circle of this high-tier soccer clubs, be able to help its level or upgrade its level of soccer?
I think it's extremely hard. It's easy to buy into these things, but the reason they have big value in Europe is because they represent industries that have built over 100 years. China needs its own football culture before those cultural industries can grow on them. And we're not yet seeing the same levels of investment going into the grassroots game here, to the kids game in China. So without a huge number of people who are deeply passionate and emotional about the game and willing to consume the game themselves in their own lives, all of the knowledge that we have about how Europe works from these acquisitions isn't actually going to help. We still need the same thing, that China needs to become a grassroots football nation in its own right, and people have the ethical and moral understanding of what it is to participate in this game.
So what many would wonder, Professor Liu, of course you are not a soccer expert, but let me just ask you from an investment sense, if the purpose of the investment is, at least part of it, for upgrading China's soccer participation worldwide, can those, at least part of those huge sums of cash being put into grassroots soccer, cultivations or educations in China, so that maybe we'll have a more direct solution to a higher level of soccer, more stadiums, more availability to the children during the sports classes in the middle school and also in the primary schools, and many other areas to encourage kids to play soccer?
That's right. I think those investors have also been, claiming that they are doing more of philanthropy work by, investing overseas, buying those teams. Eventually they contribute to the growth of the Chinese sports industry and also to train those kids. And some of them, also gave some quotas to train the Chinese kids within those teams. They're using their facilities, but they manifestly said very clear that we train those kids just for the sake of selling them to those football teams. So therefore, I think our colleague here is doing the right job, really, to do popular education, so you can buy the best horse in the world to run and to win the champion. But how to really train your own kids to really grow in their constitution, to grow in their courage and in their sports skills. So that's they are not really closely correlated.
Okay, those are of course interesting questions. We're also now joined by a expert on soccer coming from Europe. In Lisbon, we are having Mr. Luis Aquila, who is a journalist and author of many books covering world soccer. Mr. Aquila, finally, great to have you. Your comments about the Chinese heavy investment financially, commercially into European soccer clubs, briefly from you.
Well, it is a normal investment. Right now, the Chinese are doing this. Before, people from Emirates do the same with Manchester City and Paris Saint-Germain. Also, the Glazer brothers from USA bought Manchester United. So, if you think in the plan of investments, it's a smart choice. I give you an example. The actual owner of Leicester City, a Taiwan businessman, bought the club in 2010 for 36 million pounds, and 6 years later, right now, the club have a value of 400 million pounds. So this is a smart investment. For other ends, there is another kind of investment in teams of lower league divisions that is happening now in Portugal. In Portugal, there are 10 or 12 teams from lower league divisions that have Chinese owners, and these ones are paying the club to put the Chinese players there so they can learn and they can evolve. And this is possible to do in lower league divisions because Chinese players go there. These clubs are almost bankrupted. They are passing through enormous financial crisis. So if a businessman from China go there and say, we need to pay this football club, but you have to put in the first team 2 or 3 Chinese players, they will accept everything. It's very different when we are talking about strong teams like United, like City, like Chelsea, like Real Madrid or Barcelona. This is impossible to do right now. You don't have a single Chinese player right now that have quality to be in the best 50 or 60 teams in the world, to be there, not playing in the 11. Maybe in 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, who knows? Maybe that will happen. But these are 2 separate kinds of investments.
Yes, indeed. Mr. Aguila, may I ask you just a follow-up question? I know you have been deeply involved with many of the European football clubs owners. What is it that the Chinese and some of the foreign investors are coming in heavily for these clubs? Are Europeans feeling losing their faith? Will there be future political obstacles for them to keep their investment to a certain proportion once the economies are getting better? Briefly from you.
I'm sorry. You were asking me if there will be political obstacles for Chinese investors came to Europe and buy football teams here? Was that?
Not only Chinese investors, but also international investors in the long term.
No problem at all. Roman Abramovich was the first one to buy a football club in England. He bought Chelsea in 2004. At the time, there was a few obstacles, media obstacles, social obstacles. But after a while, Chelsea starts to play, starts to win, and the supporters were all thankful to have someone like Roman Abramovich that invested in the first years something like 300 million euros in new players. So if the teams will win, there is no problem. Supporters don't care if the owners come from China or from Russia or from Saudi Arabia. If they are losing, that is another question.
Of course, it's another question,
That
Mr.
is
Simons. Of course,
question.
nobody can win all the time. So what about you? What do you make of Mr. Aguilar's comments?
Well, you know, Leicester City is a great example to use, isn't it? The 5,000 to 1 dream that can never be repeated. And I think a lot of these investors feel that they can also win that dream. That is very, very unlikely. Much more common is the Abramovich model. And yes, they have won trophies, but that's not a sound business investment. There's over £1 billion, I think, being spent on achieving that success. So I don't see directly in the clubs that it's very easy to make a profit. I think it can be easier in some of the rights agencies and some of the middle companies there. But again, none of these things will really be pushing forward Chinese football. We need to come back to China to do that and to put some of this big investment back into the local game. Just if I can make one more point, Portugal is a great example, isn't it? We've seen investors from all over the world invest into European football, but we have yet to see any other country suggest something like positive discrimination for Chinese players in lower divisions. Nowhere in the world of football do we have this type of situation where standards are lowered to make it possible for players from one nation to take part.
Professor Liu, before we go, final words from you. Sound investment really going to be for China's future of football?
If you really want to invest into the Chinese future football, invest into Chinese kids.